So I wanted, thanks, Larry. And I want to join everybody who's been thanking the three organizations. This has been a great conference, and I really appreciate being part of it. And before I begin, I do want to acknowledge the fact that I have a co-author, Michael Parrott, who's sitting right here. And if you'll let people see you, Michael, don't be, okay, good. Yeah. Thanks. I also want to say that I have all these slides. I said, Larry, I don't know how we're going to get through them in 10 minutes. He said, you can have an extra minute or two. Okay. So that means I'm going to talk fast. That also means there's going to be a lot of data that you won't be able to read. On the bottom of each slide is the Campaign Finance Institute's URL, www.cfinst.org. These slides are there. You may download them. As far as the general purpose of what I'm talking about today, most of the people today have talked about public financing it broadly as being a good thing in general. This paper really is going to ask about specifics. Do the details affect results? And our answer broadly is yes, the details can matter a lot, and now the rest of the slides are about the evidence. Just as a matter of definition for all the slides, in all of the slides, trying to compare across jurisdictions, we're defining small donors as ones who gave $250 or less to a particular candidate. And that's what you'll see in all of the slides. A number of people earlier, starting with Fritz, gave you the basic outline of the New York City program. We don't need to spend a lot of time on it. Multiple matching funds began in 2001 with a little adjustment beginning with the election of 2009. In Los Angeles, multiple matching began with the election of 2013. It's a lower match, but it's in place. And that's what I'm going to be comparing. Many of you are familiar with the basic outlines of the Campaign Finance Institute's research on New York City. In terms of number of small donors, as we've published, the number of small donors per participating city council candidate went up when it went through a multiple matching system, and it went up per candidate even though the population per district went down. The percentage of money coming from small donors, the three bars on the left, went up in terms of percentage of private funds from small donors, and in terms of when you allocate the public matching funds, these small donors were responsible for nearly 60% of the total funds raised by candidates. And that doesn't include the matching funds that went to the people who raised $1,000 contributions. So the initial research was on the small New York City Council, and that's really what we talked up in the last several years, talking about New York City, New York State, and so forth. But lately, we've been doing a little more look and decided to look at the other offices. And I have to tell you, the results are not the same for all New York City offices. When you look at comparing the New York City Council with the mayoral elections, the New York City Council candidates got a third of their private funds from small donors, and the mayoral candidates got 9%. There's a similar disparity when you put in the public matching funds. And just for your information, in case you wondered, the other offices with larger constituencies, such as public advocate, borough president, and others, comptroller, they're about halfway between the mayor and the council candidates. So this led to some research questions. What's going on? It's the same program, different results in different offices. Is it really a difference between all mayors and city councils? Because after all, and by the way, after all, the mayor has got a lot of responsibility for things that people who can write $2,700 checks care about, like zoning and so forth. Is it about small versus large constituencies, since we're finding it for borough presidents and public advocates? Or is it something else? We really didn't know. This is a puzzle for us. So we decided to compare New York City with Los Angeles, and we did it because Los Angeles council members represent larger districts, and you also had another mayor to look at. And frankly, the results are puzzling, they're surprising, and we have more work to do, but we're sharing where we are. What happened when Los Angeles implemented multiple matching funds? Answer, number of small donors per candidate went down. I don't understand it, it's a fact. What happened to the percentage of money raised from small donors? It went down. And we're not just looking at different districts. They only we paired a couple of years together for Los Angeles. They stayed even when you added the public matching funds. But the two on the left, it went down. Comparing, then we said, okay, we got the mayor from New York City, we have both sets of offices from Los Angeles. Now you line them up in an array, and you look at all four, and what you're seeing is the city council in Los Angeles, the mayor in Los Angeles, the mayor in New York City are lower, and New York City is higher. New York City Council is higher. So there's something, and that's going to, this is a percentage of money from private funds, percentage from private plus public, number of donors. I don't need to go through the details. The shape of the bars is the same. Okay, what's going, no, this is one of the interesting things and puzzles. And by the way, one of the things we were really interested in was what about small donor diversity, not just number and not just percentage of funds. Well, as you know, we did in the past a detailed analysis of census block groups, and we did it comparing New York City Council with Assembly. This time we did it in New York City compared to Los Angeles. And we see in both cities, and this is important, in both cities, small donors come from much more diverse neighborhoods than large donors. That's true in both cities. But it's more so, much more so for New York City than Los Angeles. I'm not going to go through this chart in detail. You can download it. But basically, New York City Council candidates raise small contributions from 90% of the city's census block groups. And the ones they don't raise money from are, generally speaking, airports and parks. Whereas in Los Angeles, it's 2/3 of the census block groups. And in every measure you look at, whether it's household income, percent poverty, racial diversity, New York City Council is different from Los Angeles and more toward looking like what the city as a whole looks like. So we're wondering what's going on. What are the explanations? And frankly, we're still working on this. Why is it that New York City Council is different from New York City Mayor, Los Angeles Council, Los Angeles mayors? I say we're still exploring, but we think there are likely some structural issues at play that are going to be important as you design a potential law. For example, here are some possible non-campaign finance law explanations. One, people with money care more about mayors than council members. That makes a lot of sense. It helps explain why New York City's mayor is different from New York City Council, but it doesn't explain why Los Angeles Council is different from New York City Council. So it's something that's possible, but it's not satisfying. It's not enough. What about the idea that it's just larger constituencies, which is where we started when we looked at borough presidents and so forth? Well, Los Angeles City Council is about 250,000. New York City Council is about 160,000. Yeah, it's a different, but it's not big enough to be plausible explanation for the magnitude of the difference that we see. What about the programming itself? Here are some plausible possible explanations, which I do not pretend that we have proven, but they're plausible. Residency requirements, and I do think this is very plausible. In New York City Council, you have to have a minimum number of people who live in your districts in order to qualify for public funding. New York City Mayor just says you have to be from the city. That means it could all be in Wall Street and law firms, right? Los Angeles also, no geographic requirement for 2013. I'm thinking that has to make a difference. But in Los Angeles, controlled experiment, we're delighted to say, I love controlled experiments. They will have residency requirements in 2015, give us some time, and so forth and so on. We'll compare the 2 years. But I'm thinking that's plausible. What about the role of the threshold as a whole? Well, it turns out that in New York City, if you get your 70 contributions in district and you match them, you're pretty far along toward getting your spending limit. That's nowhere near true for mayor or for Los Angeles. You have to raise a lot more in private funds. 3, public funding in New York is 55% of the spending limit. Los Angeles, it's about half that. Again, I don't know, but these are all pretty plausible to me. Alternative explanations. Maybe it's because the mayoral contribution limits are too high. They're about double in New York for mayor as for city council. Well, so people, a lot of reform groups have started to ask, does it really make sense to match the first $175 for somebody who gives $2,500 or $2,700 or $4,950? That's a good question, but you know, there's a problem coming with that question. You know, again, people who do that focus on the difference between mayor and city council in New York, but in Los Angeles, the contribution limits are half as high as New York City's. And in Los Angeles, council and mayor, as a result, much lower than New York City Council. It's more like the mayor. So the contribution limit is not going to explain it. I mean, and frankly, to me, that means that the evidence doesn't necessarily push you towards saying you have to have very low contribution limits, as some people are advocating now. Again, I'm not certain of this. I'm going to love to watch Montgomery County once they've gone through a full election cycle, since they in effect have a $150 contribution limit, but that's, maybe county office works differently. I don't know. It's a big county. So, but the other side of it that you have to look at is that if really low limits scare candidates away and make them decide not to opt in voluntarily, then frankly, your program has accomplished nothing. Because without voluntary participation, you don't have an effect. We expect, we don't assert this as a conclusion yet, we expect that there's a much more complicated interaction among all of the rules for qualifying, for donor residency, for contribution limits, and for matching funds. And it's not just any one thing, but they interact. And that's what you're going to have to look at if you want to understand that. For example, on matching, the old presidential system used to say, why can't you do this for mayor? It used to say you had to have a qualifying threshold in each of 20 states. I mean, you could do that for mayor. It doesn't have to be in-city contributions. It could be from, mayor has to raise money from each of X number of council districts. Anyway, the explanations are tentative, and we're going to be doing more in this, and we're going to want to add more cities, including Chicago. But we are certain, we feel comfortable about 2 points so far. 1, not all matching funds have the same effects. And 2, program details explain part of the difference. The bottom line for public financing, passing a bill is not enough. We heard that from Karen. We heard that on the first panel as well. It's not, the politics of persuasion is not enough. You need a program that will actually work and do its job well. Otherwise, the program won't have the staying power that Karen talked about. The fact that Connecticut legislators stay in the program while Arizonans are dropping out is important for whether that program will be sustained. And in order to get a program that will work its job well, that requires evidence and not just good rhetoric. And I would argue that a policy that works well is also not just good policy, but good politics over time to sustain a program. And for both, the details will matter.